In 1928, Henry Ford tried to build a piece of small-town Michigan in the middle of the Amazon rainforest. He shipped over Cape Cod houses, fire hydrants, a golf course, and a 50-meter water tower, enough material to build an entire American town from scratch, 3,000 miles from Detroit. Ford wanted to grow his own rubber and break free of a British-controlled monopoly that decided what every tire on every Ford car would cost him. He believed he could out-engineer the jungle itself, the same way he had out-engineered the assembly line. 9 years and millions of dollars later, not one single drop of rubber grown in that town ever touched a Ford vehicle. This is the story of Fordlandia, the jungle city Henry Ford built, and ultimately lost without ever once setting foot in it. By the 1920s, almost all the world's rubber came from British and Dutch plantations in Southeast Asia, and the price was entirely out of Henry Ford's control. Every tire, hose, and gasket on every Ford automobile depended on a supply chain he didn't own. Ford, who had spent his career trying to control every part of his production, from the steel to the glass, decided the solution was simple: grow his own rubber in his own forest on his own terms. The Amazon, the original home of the rubber tree, seemed like the obvious place to start. Ford sent botanist Dr. Carl LaRue to scout the Amazon for a site, and a follow-up team led by Ford official W.L. Reeves Blakely settled on a tract of roughly 2,900 square miles on the east bank of the Tapajos River, about 300 kilometers south of the city of Santarém, in the Brazilian state of Pará. In 1927, the Brazilian government granted Ford a concession of 10,000 square kilometers, known locally as Boa Vista, in exchange for 9% of the profits and an exemption from export taxes. The concession alone was larger than some American states, a private industrial kingdom carved out of sovereign Brazilian jungle. In August 1928, 2 vessels sailed from the United States into the heart of the Amazon, the steamer Lake Ormoc, towing a barge called the Lake Farge. On board was an entire prefabricated town, a sawmill, generators, construction equipment, and building frames that had never touched jungle soil. Leading the expedition was Einar Oxholm, a Norwegian-Danish sea captain with no agricultural experience whatsoever, who would nonetheless become Fordlandia's first plantation manager. Within months, a settlement was rising out of the rainforest, cut from raw jungle by men who had never farmed rubber in their lives. What went up looked nothing like Brazil. Ford's engineers built rows of clapboard houses in a Cape Cod style, painted white with green trim, lining streets meant to evoke small-town Michigan. There was a hospital, a school, a movie theater, a swimming pool, tennis courts, a golf course, and that 50-meter water tower looming over the jungle canopy for miles. It was a transplanted slice of American suburbia, dropped into one of the most biodiverse and unforgiving places on Earth. Henry Ford wasn't just building a rubber plantation. He was exporting an idealized version of American life, his version into the Amazon: square dances, Midwestern cooking, prohibition-era morality. Alcohol was banned inside the town. Tobacco was banned. Even certain local foods were forbidden. American managers reportedly inspected workers' homes to make sure the rules were being followed. And Ford himself, who designed every rule from thousands of miles away, never once traveled to Brazil to see how any of it actually worked. Brazilian laborers were served brown rice, whole wheat bread, canned peaches, and oatmeal, American diner food, in 90-degree jungle heat, thousands of miles from the diet they actually knew. Curfews were enforced. Dance halls and bars were forbidden inside company limits. For men who had worked the rubber trade on their own terms for generations, Fordlandia's rulebook felt less like an employer and more like a colonial government. So workers found a way around it. Just outside Ford's jurisdiction, a settlement of bars, nightclubs, and brothels rose up on stilts along the riverbank, a place workers nicknamed the Island of Innocence. Every night, canoes ferried laborers across the water, past the edge of company law, back into a world Henry Ford had tried and failed to legislate out of existence. But the deeper failure was written into the soil itself. In the wild, rubber trees grow far apart, scattered among hundreds of other species, a natural defense against disease. Ford's plantation did the exact opposite. Endless straight rows of rubber trees, planted close together in dense monoculture, which is precisely the condition a fungus called South American leaf blight needs to spread through wind and rain. Add sova leafcutter ants, lace bugs, red spiders, and caterpillars, and the trees never had a real chance. Losses from blight alone could wipe out up to 40% of a susceptible planting. It was the opposite of everything Ford had learned about efficient industrial design. In the rainforest, spacing out was the survival strategy, and clustering everything together, exactly what made his factories work, was the one thing that guaranteed collapse. None of Ford's on-site managers had any background in tropical agriculture, and the land itself, hilly, rocky, and poor, wasn't suited to rubber to begin with. By December 1930, 2 years of resentment had been building under the surface. When management tried switching the company cafeteria from waiter service to self-service, it became the final insult. Workers armed with machetes and rocks tore through the town in an uprising that became known as Quebrapanelas, breaking pans. They destroyed the cafeteria, smashed vehicles and equipment, and cut the telegraph wires, severing Fordlandia from the outside world for 3 days until Brazilian troops finally arrived to restore order. Workers had their own name for the place: Inferno Verde, green hell. The hilly terrain pooled stagnant water everywhere, breeding mosquitoes by the millions, and malaria spread through the workforce fast. Dysentery was constant. Venomous snakes were a real and present danger in a settlement built by people with no idea how to live in a rainforest. At times, as much as 30% of the entire workforce was too sick to work. This was the tropical paradise Henry Ford had promised his employees. By 1934, Ford quietly admitted defeat on the original site and moved rubber operations 40 kilometers south, to a new plantation called Belterra, built on better drained, more fertile soil. It was meant to be the second chance Fordlandia never got, and this time, the trees actually grew. But a rubber tree takes years to mature into a productive latex source, and out in the wider world, chemistry was about to make the entire project obsolete. While Belterra's trees were still maturing, wartime chemists perfected synthetic rubber, a substitute that didn't need a jungle, a decade of patience, or a single Brazilian plantation. The very war that had once made natural rubber a strategic necessity was also the war that funded the labs that made rubber trees unnecessary. By the time Belterra's rubber could have reached a single tire, the entire strategic reason for the project had quietly disappeared. In 1945, Henry Ford's grandson sold both Fordlandia and Belterra back to the Brazilian government, absorbing a loss of more than $20 million, roughly $358 million in today's money. In nearly 2 decades, not one drop of Amazonian latex from either site had ever gone into a Ford automobile. Henry Ford died in 1947, having never once set foot in the town that carried his name. Fordlandia's population collapsed to barely 90 residents by the early 2000s, but the jungle never fully reclaimed it. Today, an estimated 3,000 people live among Ford's rusting water tower, his abandoned sawmill, and rows of clapboard houses still standing in the rainforest, the ruins of an American dream the Amazon never agreed